We're rolling. Go ahead and tell everybody your name and the name of the podcast.
Hey, my name is Seth. I am going to restart that. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the TravelSmithCo podcast. My name is Seth. I am the CEO and lead travel strategist for TravelCo, the TravelSmithCo. Dang it. Don't even know what I'm saying. You're going to have a terrible time editing this.
Tell the listeners how many countries you've been to and then your favorite trip that you've taken so far.
So far, I've been to 51 countries in 5 continents, soon to be 6, heading to South America for the first time soon. My favorite trip so far, I've got a couple of different ones. I did a little Scandinavian tour, hitting Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. That was pretty high up on my list. Several years back, I did a train trip throughout Europe where I hit several different countries there. That was a very good trip. But my number one trip, I would say right now, my wife and I did a tour of Isle of Skye in Scotland about a year and a half ago. And amazing trip, had amazing weather, was on the Isle of Skye for about 4 days, 5 days, and then a little bit of other time in Scotland before and after that. Had very good weather, uncharacteristic weather for there. The sun shone. There was a lot of sunshine, which is very rare for there. I got a little bit of sunburn. I have very fair skin and was not expecting to need sunscreen on Isle of Skye, which is very well known for always having rain. So that was a great trip of mine. It's probably my favorite trip that I would list up to this point.
What is a destination that was a disappointment for you and why?
Most of the trips I've taken, I wouldn't say are disappointments. There's been a couple of maybe parts of trips. On my European trip, my bigger European trip, where I hit 6 or 7 countries in about 10 days. One of my stops was in Paris, which was a little bit disappointing after some of the other spots I'd been, just because it was a little more crowded, a little bit pricier. But there were still some good parts there. There was really good museums, really good pastries. But that was a disappointing part of that leg. I would say that I don't have a whole lot of disappointments in most of my travels. The first real international trip I took, I did a semester of university in England. So I was there for a little over 3 months, 3.5 months or so, and got to spend a good amount of time kind of seeing a new culture, even though it's same language and similar ideals and things like that. Cultures aren't completely different compared to some other cultures in the world. It was definitely enough to get my feet wet a little bit and start getting me a little more interested in traveling abroad. So the most recent trip I've been planning, I've recently have planned a trip to South America. It is a little bit different for me. I've traveled pretty extensively in Europe and a good bit in Africa and Asia, but have not been to South America yet. So in a lot of ways, it is easier than, say, some of the earlier trips I have planned, because I have a lot better grasp of how to book tickets, the types of lodgings to look for, know a lot more about logistical things of, how do I figure out what is culturally normal, how to stay safe, places to avoid, things to do, things to not do, logistical tasks like, hey, what's the best way to get to and from airports, and knowing what I need to know a lot better than whenever I first planned things. On the other hand, it is still challenging in some aspects, just because I am not as familiar with that part of the world versus, say, Europe or Africa or Asia, where I know a little bit more about at least parts of those continents as cultures. And so there was some more research into what is the culture like, what should I do here, what should I not do here. So definitely easier in knowing what I need to learn to prepare for that trip.
So we know that travel doesn't always go as planned, but sometimes that can be hard to visualize when all we see in general is a success, especially online. So tell me about a time when things didn't go as planned and how you had to kind of figure things out.
So most trips don't ever go completely according to plan. Um, it is just a matter of how adventurous the plan goes astray, how adventurous you're going to have to get to figure out the solution to whatever comes up. Um, Whenever you're traveling, you have to be very flexible because nothing will ever be exactly like you think it is going to be. It might be very, very close, and you might not have to pull any big changes. But there will always be something, a bus that runs late, a taxi that tries to charge you more, um, a hotel or Airbnb that cancels at the last minute, or when you're there, they cancel and throw you out while you're there, or don't even let you start your stay. There's always something that happens. I was going to go meet my then girlfriend, soon to be fiance, now wife. Um, we were going to meet up in England. I was working in East Africa at the time, and my flight was through Kenya and needed to fly into Dubai from there and then meet her in the UK where we were going to meet up, and where I was going to propose. However, when I got to the airport in Kenya, my flight was delayed to the extent that I was going to miss my flight into the capital of Kenya. So I was going to miss that flight. So I was going to miss my flight to Dubai, and I wasn't going to make it to the UK. And so in that case, I ended up having to buy a standby ticket on another plane that also had been delayed, that should have left a couple hours before that, but was delayed and was maybe going to make it. And so long story short, I had to exchange money and then pay with cash and buy a standby ticket and hope that I would be able to make it on the last flight to arrive in the airport, the big airport in Nairobi, so that I could make my connecting flight. And it all worked out. It was very tense for a while, but little flexibility and a little bit of patience and a whole lot of adventure.
Tell me a couple of your favorite resources that you've discovered as you've been booking trips over the last 15 or so years and exploring new places. So what are your favorite tools to use in order to do that?
So traveling is a very broad subject. So you have a lot of different aspects to that. So for that, there's a lot of different tools that you need. Unless you hire a travel agent, there's not necessarily a one-stop shop for everything. So you're going to need some help with flights. You're going to need help with lodging. You're going to need help with logistics. What is the place like? You're going to need to look up simple things like, what is the weather like when I'm going to be there? So if you're doing the research for yourself, there are quite a few different tools that you will need to use to kind of form this entire trip. I'm starting off just as a baseline. I will use a lot of Google Flights just to know typical prices. And even if not completely accurate for prices, they tend to be accurate to tell you what days are cheaper to fly on. So you can use that to get a rough idea of what flights tend to be and get an idea of costs for weekdays versus weekends, or what days of the week are cheaper, etc., for that specific destination. And then from there, you can go a little deeper and compare flights based on Google Flights, Expedia, CheapAware, GoToGate, all of these different resources. And then so for lodging, there's different things you have to look and see depending on where you're traveling. You might want a hotel, just the traditional hotel room. You might want to stay in a hostel and share a bathroom with some other travelers. You might want an Airbnb. Depending on where you're traveling, any of those could be the best option for that specific place. And so knowing which of these three am I going to choose for this specific journey. So for those tools, you can look up for traditional hotels, any of the big search engines, booking.com, Priceline, any of those will give you an idea for hotel costs. For hostels, I will use Hostel World just to get an idea of typical costs for various hostels. You can use some filters of if you want a private room, if you want a mixed gender dorm or an all male dorm or all female dorm. So you can filter out a lot of things on that website. And so and then of course Airbnb, if you're wanting an entire apartment or entire house, are all good tools for lodging. As far as local transport, on the ground stuff, a couple of different tools for that. If it is not necessarily within the city travel, but maybe city to city or country to next country, if you're in Europe or other places that countries are very close to, there's a website and an app called Rome to Rio that will let you see a bunch of different options. It'll tell you if you can drive, if you can take a taxi, if you can take a bus, if you can take a ferry, if you can take an airplane, all kinds of different options, and let you know what the options are for that. And then we'll also point you to where you can book those options. As far as inner city stuff, as well as cultural ideas, cultural awareness things, safety awareness issues, how to get to and from airports, logistical things like that. There's a wonderful site called Wiki Travel. And so on that page, you can search specific cities or countries. And so if I'm going to go to London, for example, I could type in London on that search and it would have a bunch of different tabs, a bunch of different drop-down options of knowing some history, some culture, basic facts about size and demographics, etc. But it would also have options of saying how to get to and from the various airports and how much those costs and maybe what parts of the town to stay in if you're wanting good nightlife, or to stay in if you're wanting to invest in the art scene, or what parts of town to avoid at night because maybe it's a little bit more dangerous. And so Wiki Travel is an excellent resource for that. So for all of those things, it is very much what I like to call cash versus convenience. You can pay somebody at a booking agency or somebody else. You can pay to not have to delve into all of those things, but a lot of times the more you delve into it yourself, you can actually save a little bit of money. You don't have to look at multiple airline websites to buy a flight out of the country or to buy a flight to wherever. But the more you look, you might find better deals in different places. So if you are willing to put a little extra work in, it's not as convenient, but you can save some cash. The same is true for something as basic as how to get to and from the airport. If you want to pay for the convenience, usually the easiest way is to book a taxi or some other private vehicle as soon as you get there. That's the most convenient thing to do. It's not the most cash efficient, but it's convenient. So keep in mind whenever you're planning all those things, your cash versus your convenience. What are you willing to do to save a little bit of extra cash to be able to travel a little more, or to be able to splurge on something else a little later?
What's your favorite part about planning a trip?
I would say my favorite part about planning a trip would probably be seeing it come to fruition, being able to see the finished product of knowing all the different aspects, knowing that you have organized the flights, you have organized where you're going to stay, you have organized ideas for what to do while you're there, and seeing how each of those links together, and essentially building a bunch of different pieces of the puzzle. And then at the end, you put all the bigger pieces together. So it's almost like putting a jigsaw puzzle together, but then really putting several different jigsaw puzzles together that then all fit together at the end to make one large picture of the trip. This has been Seth from TravelSmithCo. Thank you for watching and listening.
Perfect.